which is by Bela Dimova from the University of Cambridge. The title of Bela's presentation is Asian, Thrace and European History, Asian and Modern Perspectives on Cultural Relations in the Balkans.
So, can you hear me okay with that mic? Okay, maybe I'll use it. Is that better?
I think it's off.
Now? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would also start with thanking the organisers for such a lovely collection of diverse papers. And I should say I'm a PhD student at Cambridge. I'm at the moment trying to finish my PhD in archaeology. And I'm very happy to be coming out of this discussion on migration because this is another topic which is very dear to my heart. And I think which concerns us all, especially since everyone in this room is a migrant who has greatly benefited from moving countries and learning from another culture. Now, my own research is about Thracian-Greek interactions in the first millennium BC. And this is what I'm going to present today is some of the background which I came across during my research, which has perhaps more contemporary resonance about the ways that we relate to the past and the way the past relates to us. So, I would like to start with a map, which is not the way we usually see a map of Bulgaria. And I would like to tell you about a stereotype, which I'm sure you can recognize. So, Bulgaria is a crossroads, it's a cliche. It's between Asia and Europe. It's the corner of Europe. And as a result of this position, or rather this position has been used to construct the image of Bulgaria as a periphery of Europe. There is always something Oriental that is inherent. We're always aspiring to be part of the EU, aspiring to be part of the West. And at the same time, there is something Oriental pulling us back, or so the stereotype goes. So this is not an objective reality. This is the product of a particular historical discourse, which Bela Dimova has described as Balkanism. It is a particular way of understanding the Balkans as always an intermediary place. No matter what happens in the Balkans, even if we overcome corruption, even if the GDP grows, there will always be this discourse that it's not enough. It's always coming short of being integrated into the West. And I have seen this also projected back into the past. It goes back to seeing Thrace as a place of violence, as a place separated, the way modern Bulgaria is separated by borders from the main stage of history. And now, for ancient Thrace, we have two main kinds of sources. On one hand, we have classical texts from ancient authors, mostly Greek and Roman. And on the other hand, we have archaeological sources. And now the classical texts coming from the Greek and Roman perspective often give us the image of hostility, fighting. They talk about the Thracian pirates. So, two of the most poignant examples are from the island of Thassos in the North Aegean and the Black Sea coast. So Xenophon tells us that it was very difficult for Greek ships to travel around the Black Sea because the Thracian tribes had divided the coast south of Burgas, and whenever a ship would crash or try to stop along the coast, the Thracians would come and raid the ship. Similarly, for the case of Thassos, we have these surviving poems which have been interpreted as historical evidence, which talk about fighting between Thracians and Greeks. Archaeologos, who is our main source, said that the island was wretched. He said it looked like the ass of a donkey. And he notably said that when the Greeks came to Thassos, they came with a cargo of pure gold to bribe the Thracian dogs. Now, there has been some discussion, and actually we have learned that the reading of this word dogs in the original stone in Greek has been rather the product of us absorbing ancient prejudice rather than it's there in the original place. The word can also be reconstructed as Thracian men, which gives a very different reading of this story. So all these narratives of hostility, of clashes between Greeks and Thracians, of Thrace being backward and exotic and country of violent warriors, they are to be challenged. They are not to be taken for granted. Now, but this is what we have inherited anyway as the historiography. The response by many Bulgarian scholars have been to emphasize this great civilization that was Thrace. And notably from the 1970s, there have been a series of international exhibitions, Thracian gold, the enigmatic kingdom of Orpheus. And they all center on gold warriors, kings, gold warriors, kings. And they, although they try to elevate Thrace to the status of a civilization with great art, with great treasure, with great achievements, they continue to perpetuate this image of Thrace being the exotic one, the one, the land that is not like Greece. It is still the land of warriors, still the land of violence. So although they have been trying to subvert the narrative of clash of civilizations, they have also played into it in the same way. And this is not something that only concerns academics. This is something that we're faced with every day. This is an image very much imprinted. No other country that I know is so obsessed with the past. No other national media has that many reports about archaeological finds every day, every summer. Not to mention all the marketing. I could put wine, I could put lots of other places in which the Thracian past is used to construct an image which is both, it's an image of national pride. This is our heritage. We're a poor country. We should be proud of something. So let's look into the past for the treasures that we should be proud of. But at the same time, this is an image that paints it as a land of violence, a land exotic, and a land of golden treasures. So I think we can go a little bit beyond this. And I think we can look at the place of Thrace in ancient history, and particularly the engagement with the Greek world, in a more nuanced way. So this is a map of Greek settlements overseas, found between in the first half of the first millennium BC. The Greeks settled, and they established many colonies. Now, for my PhD, I have focused on the case study of Apollonia Pontica, which is modern Sozopol. And I have tried to look at, in more detail, at what kind of interactions are happening there, and how can we tell the history of Thrace differently. So here's a picture of Sozopol, a lovely place. Now, the history of Apollonia, we don't have that many historical sources, so people had previously assumed that the same applied there, that the conflict between Thracians and Greeks, like everywhere else, was also occurring at Apollonia. But as we have been researching and excavating more and more finds, we can now paint a different picture. So this is a distribution of coins that were made by Apollonia and distributed across Thrace. And what these stand for are economic transactions. This is the network of trade which Apollonia was developing in the hinterland. Now, it does not mean that Apollonia was colonizing economically Thrace. We cannot know that. But it does mean that, to a great extent, Apollonia was economically integrated with the people from the hinterland. Similarly, we can look at the bulk imports by looking at transport containers, the amphorae that were brought. We can see a very deep distribution inland into Thrace. So we can see a true economic partnership developing between the colony and the people in the hinterland. Now, what is even more interesting is that we can see from recent excavations around the Bay of Balkans, especially at Develt, which was excavated in the 80s, and Kurmubat, which was many of these sites around Kurmubat have been excavated in the last 15 years. We can actually look at the intermediate communities that were instrumental in transporting goods from the coast inland. And we can also look at why these people might have been interested in coming into contact with the Greeks. So it is actually because there was a gap before that we didn't understand their part of the story, but now through archaeology we can write that in. And what we find there is evidence that there were trading settlements. There were people indigenous people who were taking an active role in distributing the imports from Apollonia inland. The finds around Kurmubat are mostly funerary, so mostly graves in which we find Greek goods. And the kind of things we find there are, for example, this jug. Now, this is a very interesting find. Most of them are drinking cups, so we can see that what they were interested in, they weren't interested in all things Greek, they were interested in only particular things that made sense for their own cultural view. And these are the drinking cups. So in a way they confirm the stereotype of the Thracians drinking. But this one in particular tells us much more. This is a red figured vase, so it's executed in a typical Athenian Attic style. But it follows the shape of indigenous cups that we have found from much earlier periods, like here and here. So in order to produce this object, if we think beyond this is Greek or this is Thracian, we can see the coming together of craftspeople from the two traditions and creating a hybrid object. In order for this object to exist, you have to have a potter in Athens who knows how to make a pot by using this technique. And you have to have him know that someone in the back likes this shape of cup. So he's brought a prototype from Thrace, and then he has made it into his own tradition, and then exported it back to Thrace. We have another one of these jugs at Bologna, which shows us that perhaps there were more of them, and perhaps there is a direct marketing relationship. That is, people in Athens knew what was sought in Thrace, and they were marketing a particular product for a particular audience. Now this introduces nuance, it makes the story a bit more specific, and it helps us to understand an engagement between customer and producer rather than a clash of civilizations. But we can see similar stories unfolding in other ways. If we change the way we see, the paradigm we think in, if we think about what are the people doing, we can find, for example, this is the Chitinyovo Mogila tumulus at the Rossell, under which there is a magnificent structure very early on in the 5th century. And this is the first structure of its kind in Thrace. We think that it was probably made by foreign craftsmen, foreign architects, most probably from Athens. What this means is, again, not the import of a Greek idea, it is the import of Greek skills at the service of local demand. We see this also in other tombs and other types of pottery, and the list goes on and on. As soon as we start looking for these things, we find evidence of people being integrated in each other's economic systems, in each other's systems of value in a much more nuanced way than the clash between Greeks and Thracians might suggest in the historical sources. And we also know that this goes back further into the past. Just quickly to go over, this is from the early Iron Age, that is the 11th or 6th century BC. These are finds from amber. Now, amber in Europe is very rare, and we know that these specifically came from the Baltics. So, local people in Thrace were having extended, long-distance relationships. They were interested in all kinds of imports, not just Greek things. This one in particular, necklace from amber coming from Lukcha, has been an Egyptian scarab from the 19th century BC. How it traveled to the Rhodope, we don't know, but it certainly shows us what people were interested in, and they were interested in luxury. That's what it was. So I will leave you with that. I hope I have tried to show that by changing our picture of the past, we can change also our vision of the future and imagine the Balkans in a different way, in a more human way.
I would like to thank Bela for a really fascinating and wide-ranging presentation. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. So, yes?
Yeah, what's the sort of response you get from sort of Greek historians? Because every time you mention something about their history, it is quite upsetting, especially when they very heliocentric people, when they don't know history.
That's a very good question. So, I can't talk to Herodotus. He's dead. And I can't talk to the 19th century historians who have been creating this narrative more recently. But among modern historians, there is very much an awareness that we should be reading the sources critically, we should be reading against the grain, and I mean, historians are not living in the past, they are also changing their interpretations. The national question is a different matter. There was recently a book published about Greeks and barbarians. And unsurprisingly, its view of Thrace is quite heliocentric. So it's still a debate waiting to happen. what has been missing in this debate, I think, is the archaeological and the Thracian perspective. So that's what I'm hoping to contribute. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yes.
What do you think was the rate limiting step between the Greeks trying to conquer Thrace via war and military power and the economical conquering of Thrace?
I don't think there was any conquering. I think the idea of conquest comes from an analogy between ancient colonization and modern colonialism. And modern colonialism is the product of empires, of completely different structures to the ancient Greek city-states. In fact, at least in the case of Bologna, we're fairly sure that these people were not conquerors. They were, they were refugees running away from Miletus, which was being attacked. They were opportunists. They were very small and modest groups of people who could not have conquered realistically. Now, in cases where they tried to conquer, things didn't always go very well. So the story changes from place to place. Similarly, in economic terms, I think we can talk about integration, but we can't necessarily talk about conquest. The scale is not appropriate.
Perhaps one more question? Yes?
You kept talking about the notion of integration. First, with Dimova's theories about wanting to integrate into the West, but then later on, with the ideas of having certain pieces of art or certain, like the cup, something practical that gets integrated into the Bulgarian culture. But that inherently has quite a problematic, the notion of integration, because part of it is we want to define who we are. And we do not want to integrate with the West, nor would we want to accept a foreign base as Bulgarian and integrated, say, in our culture, because we're very, while we want certain aspects, we are also very firm on the fact that those are others. So we other themselves. We create the othering parameter ourselves. And so I was kind of wondering, how would you negate this problem and dilemma with this kind of binary juxtaposition between the two?
That's a really interesting question. Okay, what I mean by integration when I talk about the archaeological material is I'm looking at specific practices or specific objects fitting into systems. So I look at a Greek pot being used in a local drinking banquet. I look at Greek material culture circulating along local trade networks. So by integrate, I mean a host of very specific processes which don't carry such a charge. Then the modern question of integration is another one. I think it implies that we were disintegrated and we want to be integrated. It implies again this threat of loss of identity, which, I don't know, I think it's a little bit of a wrong way of looking at it. Cultures change all the time. There is no self that can be stable. We need to be constantly reinventing ourselves in relation to other entities. For example, reinventing Bulgarian identity in relation to Europe. And that doesn't mean that Bulgarian identity loses its Bulgarianness. It just means that it's constantly changing and we have to accept that. So the world goes.
Yeah, but then are you accepting that the Greek mugs that get, as you say, integrated into the culture are perceived by the people themselves as Greek mugs? Or are they something that was comfortable, that looks funny and doesn't have a specific identity with it, that we use and it become normalized as part of our culture? As you say, cultures change and they adapt and they include other aspects.
I think the power of it comes from being in between, from being hybrid. What's interesting is those mugs, actually, the picture on them is of Thracian warriors. So it's very much an image of the self through the medium of the other. So it plays in many levels.
So it's just Greek mug.
Right. Okay. I would like to thank Bela for her very direct and succinct answers. Thank you.